So if you've spent any decent amount of time in the gaming sphere, you might have noticed that there's been a bit of a renaissance for classic first-person shooters. Games like Doom, Quake, Wolfenstein, Shadow Warrior, Duke Nukem, and more have seen a bit of a resurgence as of late. And while many of these FPS forefathers have had sequels and or reboots within the past couple of years, many indie developers have started developing their own first-person shooters inspired by the classics, effectively making their own subgenre of first-person shooters called retro-style FPSs or boomer shooters. These games are often characterized by their fast-paced and frantic action, high enemy count, lower pixelated graphics, and minimal to vague storytelling. You have no doubt seen some of these games, as many of them have become quite popular over the years. Ultra Kill, Dusk, Ion Fury, or even as far back as the Brutal Doom mods for the original Doom are just a few notable examples that really led the charge for these games. Though the subgenre is a little oversaturated now, as everyone and their grandmother is trying to make the next big retro-style FPS with mechanics similar to Doom Eternal. But there are still some really good standouts like Turbo Overkill, Postal Brain Damage, Cultic, and the topic of today's video, Prodeus. Prodeus is a retro-style first-person shooter made by Bounding Box Software that has you playing as a corrupted soldier barreling through everything in his way as he journeys to destroy the creator of the world, the Prodeus. Said by the developers to be a first-person shooter of old reimagined using modern rendering techniques, I can assure you that this game makes good on that statement because you can see, hear, and feel the aesthetic of this game the moment you hit the first menu. The two developers of Bounding Box Software really killed it with the aesthetics and the graphics of this game. Visually, this game looks amazing and is probably one of its biggest standouts. And the best part is, you can customize the retro style of your FPS. Not a fan or just getting tired of the pixelated graphics? You can just turn them off. Because it turns out, under all those pixels are just fully 3D models. You're really just applying a pixel shader over everything. Though, as cool as that is, why would you play a retro FPS and decide to turn off the retro? It kind of really defeats the purpose of playing the retro style FPS. On top of the amazing graphics, the soundtrack by Andrew Holsholt is perfect. You may recognize that name from his work on the Ancient Gods DLC for Doom Eternal, Dusk, and other indie FPS games. But the soundtrack for Prodeus I feel like is some of his best work. The first time I heard anything from Holsholt was from the Ancient Gods DLC, and I'll be honest, I really wasn't a fan of his soundtrack compared to David Levy's. It seemed like he was trying to mimic Mick Gordon's legendary soundtrack, and he did a good job, but I could tell he could do more, and Prodeus is proof of that. Okay, so once you're done gawking at the visuals, you may want to actually start playing the game. And assuming you're not playing on anything past hard, you'll be tearing through enemies like you're trying to get your stolen rabbit back. This game definitely scratches that itch for bloody, fast-paced shooters with perhaps too many weapons. There are currently 13 weapons that you can obtain, with more that I assume will be added at a later date. Each weapon is part of one of 6 categories: melee, bullets, shotguns, explosives, energy, and chaos. Each category has 3 different weapons that use that ammo type. For example, the bullets category has a pistol, 2 machine guns, and a minigun. Every weapon also has a secondary fire ability. These secondary abilities can range from a charged shot from your shotgun to a node that you can fire from your plasma gun that allows all your shots to track to whatever that node hits. These secondary modes add some creativity to what would be your run-of-the-mill Doom-esque weapons, and definitely add a little more fun to your demon-killing escapades. Though if I could give one complaint about the weapons, it's that I think your progression to get them is a little slow. More on that later. Each mission follows the trusted Doom formula of running through a level, killing everything in your way, and finding keys as needed until you can find and or access the end gate. Of course, there are also plenty of secrets to find within each level, ranging from simple armor and weapon pickups to ore, which is this game's currency. To aid you in finding some of these secrets, they have a fully 3D auto map that, while not very detailed, is very good at making each item on the map distinct. It really is nice to see when developers take the time to make their maps completely 3D. It's a small addition in the grand scheme of things, but it adds all the more detail. Between missions, you'll be traversing a map that allows you to get from level to level, as well as replay levels. Along with regular missions, you'll also have time trials based on specific weapons. If you hit all the targets and get to the end within a certain amount of time, you'll be awarded some extra ore. Once you have enough ore, you can head to the shop and use it to buy more guns as well as upgrades for yourself, such as a double jump and a dash. The shop also acts as a testing ground for your newly acquired weapons. Unfortunately, this is where one of my bigger complaints hits. Remember when I said that you obtain weapons a little slowly? Well, it's mainly due to this shop. As I said, you can get new weapons and abilities from the shop using ore that you find. The problem is most of the ore that you find are hidden as secrets. which means your character progression is essentially determined by how many secrets you can find, which makes getting new weapons and abilities pretty slow depending on how good you are at exploring each level. On top of that, you don't have access to all the items. The items are separated by tiers and you have to buy all the items in one tier before you can get to the next tier. Though this is a good way to encourage you to explore and find secrets, and the time trials can help with getting more ore, personally I think they should have had another system of currency to get weapons and abilities, like having a separate currency for weapons and a separate one for abilities. The slow character progression can make the first portion of the game seem a little slow as you're stuck using the same 5, maybe 6 weapons for a while. That may not seem too bad, but the many weapons of this game are one of its highlights, so the fact that it takes so long to actually start collecting them is a little annoying. This slow pace is also not helped by the levels. The level design for many of the first missions was pretty hit or miss for me. I know that they were trying to achieve the maze-like level design from games of old, but it does get a little old seeing the same industrial metal complex mixed with rocky landscapes and lava. The design definitely does get better though as the game progresses, 2 of my favorite levels being Marksman and Atonement. Once you get past the first maybe 8 to 10 levels, the design starts to change up and becomes more interesting. Really, I just think that the look of the first couple of missions sticks around for too long. You're going through one mission only to get to the next mission that looks shockingly like the last mission that you just finished, and you're probably also using the same weapons that you've had for the past couple of levels now, fighting many of the same enemies you've been fighting for the past couple of levels now. I'll talk more about that part later, but are you seeing what I'm saying? Best believe though, the fun doesn't truly begin until you start collecting more of the weapons. This game starts hitting its stride about midway through its campaign when you have a good chunk of the weapons and you probably have the double jump by that point. Combat becomes more hectic and you probably have enough weapons to keep up with it, or even blaze through it. On that note though, if you have any experience with these types of shooters, you'll probably end up blazing through these levels with ease, so I would suggest starting on hard if you want any kind of challenge. This obviously might be different for other people, but this game was not very hard for me. I started this game on normal and by the 3rd level I decided to increase the difficulty. This is mainly due to how slow the beginning levels are. Again, you're stuck using the same weapons for a while and the enemies are a lot more sporadic. The difficulty doesn't really start to hit until later levels where they start throwing more hordes of enemies at you. And even if you do die, the checkpoint system allows you to instantly respawn at your last acquired checkpoint without losing any progress. That's not to say that the game is a complete cakewalk, I certainly died plenty of times, but with a slow difficulty curve and an incredibly forgiving checkpoint system, you might find yourself looking for a bit more of a challenge. Before you jump headfirst into the demon hordes, it might be smart to know what you'll be fighting. The enemies in this game can be broken down into 2 main factions, the Forces of Chaos and the Proteans. The Forces of Chaos are a majority of what you'll be killing throughout each level. These enemies consist of your average Doom type enemies with a few extras thrown in there for fun. You got your zombie soldiers with their mini variations, fireball throwing imps, pinkies, cacodemons. They've even got their own versions of pain elementals and lost souls. Some chaos forces can also be corrupted by the Proteans, which increases their health and damage and causes them to fight other chaos forces. Now the actual Proteans are almost like mini bosses. The game will often set them up at the end of missions or as tough enemies to fight during big arena fights. And for good reason. Most of the Proteans have high health and can deal heavy damage, as well as have other abilities like the corruption and invisibility. However, there are only about 3 Protean enemies currently. The greatest issue I would say I have with the enemies in this game is the lack of variety. Out of the 13 Chaos enemies, counting the zombie variations, there are only 3 of them that I would call original. And while I don't mind seeing the Doom inspiration in the enemies, I can't help but think that they should have interspersed them with more of their own enemy types. Not only to add more variety, but to also make them more unique. The Proteus don't really make up for this lack of variety either, since most of the Proteus forces are just corrupted versions of the Chaos enemies. Though each of the actual Proteans are completely unique in design, there aren't enough of them to be notable. This lack of enemy variety can make combat encounters a little repetitive at times, because they often send many of the same monsters at you. It also doesn't really help if you have played any of the actual Doom games before and have fought enemies like this. It kinda leads to a been there, done that feeling. I know I said that boomer shooters tend to have vague to minimal stories, but this game takes that to a new level, because there's almost no story to speak of in this game. The only bits of story that you get are in the map, where each level gives you a small description of the area that the level takes place in, and sometimes the progression that you've taken to get there, and the random data modules that you can find in some of the levels that give you small tidbits of lore. And all of that would be fine if we had even the slightest bit of context as to what the heck was going on, because this game doesn't tell you squat in the beginning, and continues to not tell you squat for a majority of the game. The data modules would be far more useful in providing that context if they 1. Bothered to give more information, 2. Weren't secrets that you had to find, and 3. Weren't so scattered between levels. I think I found maybe 3 of these things during my first playthrough, and each one was at least 5 levels apart from the last one. Now obviously I might have just missed some of them, but that doesn't excuse the fact that I missed potentially important story info because I simply didn't find a secret piece of hidden lore somewhere in the levels. Which is a shame because the atmosphere and aesthetic of Prodeus are practically screaming to have a proper story attached to them. All I can tell you is that the 2 main factions, the Proteans and the Chaos, are at war with each other with us humans caught in between it all. The Proteans are looking to find perfection through order using flesh and bone. Don't ask me what that means. While the Chaos are basically looking to cause as much havoc as possible. We play as a corrupted Proteus soldier looking to destroy his creators, the Proteus. For some reason. Oh, and by the way, half of what I just told you, I got from reading the wiki. With that being said, I think it's important to note that this is one of what I assume will be several campaigns. So despite some of my complaints, if Prodeus seems short, unfinished, or like it's missing something, just remember that that's because it technically is. I would also like to give a small mention to the multiplayer and level editor. I couldn't find anyone currently playing the multiplayer, but it's like your average fast-paced, quick-style arena shooter, while the level editor allows people to create and share their own levels within the game. Unfortunately, if you play on console, you won't be able to use the level editor because it's only available on PC, but you can still play some of the user-made levels. And like anything that allows for community creativity, the user levels range from downright goofy to well-made levels that wouldn't be out of place in the actual campaign. Weirdly enough though, there are 2 weapons in both the multiplayer and the level editor that are not available in the campaign, those being the Plexus and the Void Cannon. You may have noticed that the energy and the melee weapon categories are missing 2 weapons. The Plexus and the Void Cannon are the missing energy weapons. I assume that they'll be added in whatever future updates that this game gets, but it seems weird to have 2 fully functional weapons that should be in the campaign only available in the multiplayer and the level editor. Prodeus is a boomer shooter that should scratch every itch you could possibly have for fast-paced action shooters. I would highly suggest this game if you're looking for something like the classics, but done in a new way. I hope I was able to at least pique your interest in this game, or maybe even got you to play it yourself. I'll see you next time.